Ms. Tiffany. Chair recognizes the ranking member from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tyler, you launched the Corrections Accountability Project at the Urban Justice Center. As I understand it, the goal was to eliminate the influence of commercial interests on the criminal justice system and those it touches. Could you explain the various ways in which the criminal justice system has been financially exploited?
Absolutely, thank you. The Corrections Accountability Project is a predecessor to Worth Rises. And I think one of the ways to think about it is the ways in which the prison industry is both working in tandem with sort of the correctional system, but also at times exploiting the correctional system for its own gains. And so, what we see is a massive industry that has been built, and oftentimes, sometimes in conflict with the correctional system. So a correctional system that wants to provide care with correctional health care companies that are actually cutting costs dramatically and in many ways harming people significantly inside of prisons and jails. And so that's just one example, but there is a really broad industry here that has kind of leached its way onto our carceral system.
And so you believe that the prison industry has come to depend on stripping people of their liberty?
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, if you take the biggest example, right, the private prison operators that are actually publicly traded, they have minimum occupancy guarantees embedded in their contracts with agencies that are 80%, 90% requiring all of their beds, or 80% or 90% of their beds to be filled. So there's no doubt that they have an interest in putting more people behind bars.
Do you believe the private prison industry should be abolished?
Absolutely. I think there's no world that we can have a just system where people are profiting off of putting people in prisons and jails. There's only two ways for a business to make money. And my career before what I do today was on Wall Street, and I worked at the Goldman Sachs and the Morgan Stanleys and the Citigroups of the world. And there's two ways you make money. You either increase revenue, which for the prison industry means more bodies behind bars for longer, or you cut costs, expenses, which means basically worse quality and care.
And how does the prison industry work to increase the number of prisoners?
They lobby and they give campaign financing donations to those who are interested in toughen crime laws. They have done that extensively.
Now, thank you. Approximately 68 million Americans have a criminal record. We're aware of the direct costs of law enforcement, prison, and courts, as well as the cost to businesses and the economy. Can you discuss the cost to the individual of having a criminal record? How does it impact their quality of life and their ability to contribute to society and the overall economy?
So there are all 45,000 collateral consequences to being incarcerated. These, and just having a criminal conviction generally, these collateral consequences can impact your ability to get housing or access public assistance. As was mentioned, it can impact your ability to get a professional license, which can hinder your future sort of income. In fact, when people are incarcerated, their families immediately see a decline of income of 22%, and even when they come home, income is depressed by 15% after incarceration. What that does is it hinders their ability to sort of grow economically up the ladder, and not just for them, but also their families.
Is there a correlation between collateral consequences that hinder the reintegration into society of offenders and recidivism rates?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, there's no way to think about a world in which you're creating more crime, creating more collateral consequences, creating a situation in people have less economic opportunity and expecting them to be able to exist in the society productively, right? At the end of the day, people will do what they need to do to make ends meet, to eat, to find a place to sleep, right? We are seeing these cases of people who have nowhere else to turn but sleeping on the street, and those becoming criminalized behaviors.
And finally, what needs to be done to improve reentry outcomes?
We need to invest in community support. The reality is that prisons were not meant for care, and that if we really want to address the social ails that lead to criminal behavior, we need to provide support and fund that support in community.
Thank you. And lastly, You said there were 32,000 consequences?
45,000.
How do you measure, where do you get that statistic?
There's actually a database, partially where BJA is actually involved, where they have measured the number of collateral consequences across states. So that's consequences at the federal level as well as consequences in every state for having a criminal conviction.
There are 45,000 possible consequences to an individual.
Yes, to having a criminal conviction.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Fry.